Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto. Show me the crypto.
In a world on the brink of disruption, two men will bring you clarity by interviewing some of the most intelligent and influential names in the blockchain world. Welcome to Show Me the Crypto with your hosts, Wade Patterson and Ulf Lonergan.
Well, hi there and welcome to Show Me the Crypto. My name is Wade Patterson.
And I'm Ulf Lonergan.
We're a couple of friends from Canada who love learning about cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, and we're happy you're along for the ride. Whether you're a crypto virgin or you know your way around the block, we hope our interviews with some of the most intelligent and influential people in the blockchain space help deliver you with value. And on this episode, we're joined by Michael Kong, CEO of Fantom Foundation. While studying IT and finance at the University of Sydney, Michael researched smart contract security and eventually started a cryptocurrency fund with others from traditional finance called Token Capital Management, which assisted Fantom in raising funds in 2018. Michael's involvement in Fantom continued to evolve until he eventually became CEO of Fantom Foundation in 2020. Michael, welcome to Show Me the Crypto.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, great to be here. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you on.
Yeah, great to have you on. We're excited about this conversation. So before we jump in, one thing for our audience, especially those watching it on YouTube, you may notice Ulf and I usually are sitting side by side together. Ulf has COVID, so we're separated. He's going to tough it out, make it through this call, so it should be good. But Michael, where I want to start with this conversation, it's always fun to talk to our guests a little bit about that first moment. And doing my research, I couldn't discover when exactly it was you first discovered crypto. When was that, and what was your initial impression?
So when I first discovered crypto, I think it was around 2012, because I've been listening to this libertarian commentator you guys are probably familiar with. It's a bit notorious in the crypto community, called Peter Schiff. Yeah. Because like when I was in high school, I kind of became like a libertarian, which is how I was like drawn into cryptocurrencies and other things. Because basically I was just like wanted to bet against the government, right? Because I could see like, you know, how bad they were doing a whole bunch of stuff. And so Peter Schiff had back then people on his on his radio show. He does a podcast now, but he had a radio show back on there on Sirius XM, and he had people on like Olaf Kausen-Wee and Eric Warhouse, and you know, these well-known people even back in 2012. And he was telling people, oh, you know, don't buy Bitcoin and stuff. You know, it's overvalued at $10. Its true value is at like, you know,
like
zero.
He's still telling people that.
Yeah, the same stuff, right? Except, you know, the price is just multiplied like 5,000 times. But anyway, like he doesn't seem to be deterred by that. So I kind of like thought about Bitcoin. I was like, oh yeah, maybe I shouldn't like, you know, dabble into Bitcoin. But then in 2013, I talked to a few more other people that were kind of interested in Bitcoin, and so that's when I really got involved, and I bought some Bitcoin back then. But then, you know, I didn't really do anything more further than that, because I just wasn't like really that interested in working in like kind of like the payment space area. And I kind of saw Bitcoin as like just kind of like a store of value and being used for payments. And honestly, that didn't really like interest me that much in terms of like having a career in it or having a job in it. But then in 2015, a couple of friends of mine at university were talking to me about Ethereum, and they were saying, oh, it's not just like Bitcoin, you know, it's this technology with smart contracts where you can code like anything you want. It's totally programmable. And so you can build all sorts of different applications on it. And it's all like decentralized peer-to-peer. It just runs on another chain called Ethereum. And so that's when I started to get really, really interested in and sort of the applications that you could build. So I started like experimenting with Solidity, you know, like writing smart contracts, just doing like building like random stuff, just kind of like playing around with it. And then fortunately in 2016, when I was doing like a final year, like major software project, there's a professor at University of Sydney programming languages group that actually we're working with quite a lot of Fantom now, called Bernard Schultz, who was very much interested in doing like a whole bunch of like analysis of smart contract, like finding smart contract securities, like automatic like detection of like patterns, certain patterns within smart contracts, based at the virtual machine level. So I was part of like his research group, and push out like a bunch of research there, and I did my honors thesis on kind of like gas related exploits. So that's kind of like my background, how I got started. So fortunately, I managed to actually get quite a lot of technical knowledge at university, and I was a bit surprised by that, because I thought, the university wasn't interested in blockchain research at all. But even back in 2016, at least a couple of people were.
Yeah, actually, that was going to be a question that I was going to ask is, you're there, you're studying IT and finance in university, but then you're doing all of this research on the side as well. And so I was going to ask if that was keeping pace with your own research that you were doing on the side, but it sounds like it kind of meshed together.
Yeah, that's right. It kind of did, because, what I was doing kind of on the side was just experimenting with smart contracts, just like coding at like a high level, writing in Solidity, experimenting, using a Pilix, etc. Kind of the research I did at the university was more on the lower level stuff. So more specifically to do with like virtual machine instructions and analyzing how, smart contracts really technically execute. So I was kind of combining my knowledge of like, how to program smart contract at a developer level, but also understanding under the hood how exactly it works, and building tools to kind of make sure that your smart contracts are secure.
And you've been with the Fantom Foundation for 4 years now. Can you tell us a little bit about how you initially got involved and what eventually led to you becoming CEO in 2020?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a long story. When I, as
tell
you mentioned,
the whole thing.
Yeah, we got time. It's a long podcast.
Yeah, so as you mentioned in 2017, so back in 2017, from about January to September, I was working at I was the first employee for this blockchain development firm, which is now quite big in Sydney, Australia, called Blockade. And during that time, I was also like thinking about like starting up a cryptocurrency hedge fund, because I was very much interested in, running a fund, doing that sort of like financial analysis, and also like combining like my knowledge of like crypto and IT together in that. But in order to run a fund, you need a financial services license, right? And so, me being like kind of like a noob, obviously not have a financial services license. So what I had to do was try and find people in traditional finance, or people more experienced in finance, that actually had this financial services license, so we could actually run a fund. So I went over to talk to a whole bunch of different people, and got a couple of offers, but most of the people like just kind of like ignored me. But then eventually I met these two people in traditional finance that came from a big bank in Australia called ANZ Bank. So they were running one of their big divisions. It's called like the Global Markets Division. It's just like kind of like a trading division. And they were like, I had to kind of like talk to them about cryptos. I wasn't really sure if they were that interested or not. So I had a couple of meetings with them. But then I started getting like emails and messages at like 2 a.m. And they were, asking me all sorts of questions about crypto. So clearly I could tell that they were interested. So eventually, like kind of towards the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, launched one of Australia's first like cryptocurrency hedge funds with them. And also someone on the team had a contact with a few people in Korea, and one of those people wanted to launch apparently his own like blockchain, right? And he wanted to have it like what's called like asynchronous, so basically like better, faster, cheaper than Ethereum, because he wanted to run like these like applications, these like food technology related applications on top of the chain, or at least that's what we were told. So that project obviously was Fantom, and it ended up getting a lot of hype in early to mid 2018. So the project ended up raising a bit over $40 million. It was like one of the most like hyped up ICOs at the time, these initial coin offerings. I think we all remember back in 2017, 2018. So like Fantom really came in the tail end of that kind of like ICO bull market or craze. So that's kind of how it got started. But then what we were told about the technology was not actually true. And unfortunately, the people that we were advising the project on, helping them raise the money and doing the legals and the technicals regarding like the token sale, were not exactly telling us the truth. So essentially in 2018 and early 2019, we had to like replace the whole team with a new set of developers, a new set of people. And Andre like really played a big role in that, because I was thinking about whether we should just like pack up shop. He was like, no, let's take what we have right now and see if we can develop a real technology from the ground up. And so he helped with that early technology development and building a team alongside with me. So in like early 2019, that's sort of like when I became like the guy running the show. And so we had to basically build everything from scratch. So in 2019, we were very quiet. A lot of people thought we were dead. We're just working on building kind of like a new consensus, the one that was like originally promised by the other people back in 2018. And in 2019, the team managed to do that. So just December 27, 2019 was when they launched, was when we launched the first mainnet. And a lot of people, I remember, comments were kind of surprised because they thought the Fantom was dead. They didn't really hear much from it. So, we got a little bit of attention then, but then we were like largely ignored because, a lot of time had passed since we actually done the ICO. So a lot of people thought that we're just dead. But then in 2020, we just continued working on it and we ended up getting a bit of traction. And then 2021 is when it really took off. It first began with a couple of dexes on the platform called Sushiswap and SpiritSwap that are run by two like really great teams. And they were, like forking Uniswap and Sushiswap and creating their own like variations of it on top of Fantom. And their technology and user experience is actually like really, really good. I would say it's even better than what they were forking, a lot better. And so a lot of people took notice of that and we're like, wow, so you can actually do this stuff on Fantom, then it's, fast and cheaper because it's, of the underlying technology that we call like asynchronous BFT. And then, it's network effects, right? So that kind of attracted more users, which attracted more developers who built more applications, mainly DeFi related at the beginning, which attracted more users, etc. So then, there's now like a huge DeFi ecosystem of like hundreds of applications. And there's also like, NFT based applications as well. And metaverse is now being deployed on Fantom. So a lot of the ecosystem growth is just happening organically. Like it seems like every day that, people ask me, I just got to ask actually an hour before the call. Oh, I saw this like game is like being deployed on Fantom. You're like, do you know much about it? I'm like, actually, I don't really. Because there's just people like organic. A lot of people think that, Foundation and myself are like omniscient and we know absolutely everything that's going on. The truth is that we don't. And that's actually a good thing because it shows you just like how big the community is kind of growing and how much like traction we're getting now. So I'm really happy with the progress that we've made basically from like nothing to where we actually have something like, I think quite substantial now.
Yeah, that's a crazy story. I did not know all that. That's wild that basically what was pitched was all just a lie. And then you guys still from behind the scenes came in and turned it all around. And you basically, if I understand right, you started from scratch is when you had to do that. Is that right?
Yeah. So in 2018, the original founder of Fantom, he was telling us, and same with his like developers on board, right? And these were all Koreans that we built this like new ABFT. It's a lot faster than what currently exists there. We have this simulation code. They kept saying we have simulation. In other words, like we have like a a private testnet working. So, and I was like, oh wow, that sounds pretty good then, right? And so I remember like asking them some technical questions, and I never really got like a clear response. And that probably was like the first red flag. I was like, what's going on here? So I kind of asked more questions and they were getting like a bit agitated about it. And they're like, well, just wait until like we show you the code and how it actually works and you'll really be impressed. And I kind of like, and I learned a big lesson from this. I kind of like looked into the background and the due diligence. I did due diligence in the background and the backgrounds were very strong. We're talking about like 2 associate professors. We're talking about like postdoctoral students from Yonsei University. And Yonsei University is like a very like strong technical university in Korea. So they definitely like had a real background. And so I was like, well, maybe these guys are just a lot smarter than me because, I don't really have a very strong background in distributed computing. It's more on virtual machine or like so-called like middleware, smart contract execution. Although I do like have some knowledge of distributed like ledger technology, but I thought that, these guys probably like have a lot more than me because after all, professors and postdocs, and I'm just like a guy who just got his bachelor's degree, right? So I kind of put that to the side. And then it turns out that everything they were telling me was like basically like a lie. They had produced this technical paper that was just plagiarized, where they did the classic, oh, we'll just switch the variables around. We'll just change A to X, B to Y, etc. this is like comical stuff that everybody at university always makes fun of people like this. It's like, the people who plagiarize and what they just like change the variable names and think that they'll get away with it because they apparently have new code when it's exactly the same. And that's exactly what these people did. And, they produced this, plagiarized technical paper. They even tried to patent it without even telling us. So they submitted a patent based on plagiarized technology. There's such a long story here that I don't want to take up the whole time talking about it, but a lot of it was like really dumb and stupid, like stuff like that. Like not only just like plagiarizing the underlying technology, which itself is really, really bad, but then trying to patent it afterwards is just like a whole nother level of like, I don't know, stupidity and insanity. Yeah. So, it took a while because of like, I don't know, politics and the way like people work to like eventually get rid of them. But we eventually did. And then basically had to start from scratch. So we started from, we thought we had something and then it turned out we had nothing. And then we had to start from scratch to kind of like get to where we are now. So it's been a long, hard road. And I kind of feel like we wasted a year. So some people will ask us, how come some of your competitors are like a bit further than like Fantom when you guys have been, doing well apparently? I said, well, I think part of it is that we didn't have a very good start, whereas like other projects did. And so what would have been ideal for us is that if everything that we were being told was the truth and we had kept the momentum going from when we done the ICO, I think Fantom would be in a much stronger position than it is right now. But, I can't go back in the past and change things. So can only focus on the future. I think, with Fantom's growth, it's just a matter of time before we get bigger and bigger and bigger.
It sure seems like Fantom's in a great spot. Even if there's critics, I mean, from what I can see, there's still a lot of new revitalized hype around Fantom. As you mentioned, there's a growing ecosystem of real projects. So it definitely doesn't look like some project that everybody's forgotten about. If anything, it looks like things are picking up, at least from my side of things.
Yeah, they're definitely picking up now. So, what we're trying to do in the future now is just trying to carry the momentum. So, keep focusing on building the underlying, DLT technology. Also focusing a lot on optimizing the middleware, so optimizing how smart contracts are executed, and then it's just a matter of the foundation trying to encourage as many people as possible to build on Fantom. So we have like a lot of inbound leads, a lot of people who want to build natively on Fantom, who want to bring their projects to Fantom, and we're just trying to help them as much as possible, like via technical assistance, via marketing, and also via the Fantom incentive program that we announced a few months ago, which is this 370 million FTM at the time. That's going to be used to help grow the ecosystem as well. So we're just really focused on ecosystem growth and just improving the technology. I don't like marketing gimmicks or one trick ponies or anything like that. I think if you just build the solid technology and you market your technology, I think that's what kind of like wins in the end.
There's a lot of things there, Michael, that you mentioned that I want to dive into a bit deeper. But let's start really high level. One of the goals of our channel and our podcast is to help create unintimidating content for those who are brand new to the crypto space and that kind of thing. And my understanding is that when you think of Fantom, key features seem to be the speed and the low fees. And so for somebody who's kind of new to this space, who has like a kind of a base level understanding, how is it that you're able to achieve these 1 to 2 second transactions for a fraction of a cent?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So, without getting into all the technical details, what it comes down to is a way that transactions are like processed and confirmed by the Fantom network. So it's very different from, say, like how Bitcoin and Ethereum do it. So, Bitcoin and Ethereum have basically like synchronous networks. So the transactions have to wait to be included into a block, whereas like Fantom is asynchronous. So transactions get confirmed as soon as they enter into the network. I mean, I like to use the analogy of like, transportation. Like you can have like a train that you have to wait for versus a train on demand. So say, for example, you have a train that comes every 10 minutes, right? So like the Bitcoin blockchain. So if you consider yourself to be a transaction and you line up in a queue, you line up with other transactions around you and you have to wait 10 minutes before you're able to be included into that train, right? But the train only has like a certain number of passengers. So you might not even be included in it, but if you're lucky, you're included in it, right? And then 5 other trains have to come after you to really make sure that you're transaction is part of the network, right? Whereas for Fantom, it's really like, as soon as you like go to the train station, you and all of your other passengers around you, you automatically have a train that comes to you, and you can go into that train. In other words, when you submit a transaction to the network, that transaction plus the other transactions that are submitted around the same time, they all get added into a block, and that block gets passed around to 2/3 plus one of the total validators in the network, and they get confirmed by the validators. And as soon as you reach that like confirmation threshold, then you're included part of the network. So we call this like deterministic finality as opposed to probabilistic finality. So with Bitcoin, because as soon as you're confirmed by the network, it's not guaranteed that you actually are part of the network in the end, because another part of the network may have like more transactions in it after you. The way you make sure that your transaction really is part of the network is that you have a certain number of blocks that come after you, right? So you got to really wait for those other blocks to have your transaction confirmed. So in Bitcoin's case, the average block time is like 10 minutes, but because you got to wait for 5 other blocks afterwards, in reality, it's more like an hour. Whereas for Fantom, because the network is asynchronous, because the transactions automatically get passed around the network as soon as they are submitted to the network, confirmation times are usually around 2 seconds. And you only need like one block confirmation in order to know that your transaction really has been confirmed by the network. And so that's the key difference. The key difference is between asynchronous programming versus synchronous programming. And asynchronous programming is always faster than synchronous programming, because with asynchronous technologies, you don't have to wait for other things to happen first. That being said, yeah.
Yeah, well, I was just going to spin off that and say, with that being said, inevitably with most things, there's a pro and there's a con. So what are the drawbacks to going this route?
So some of the drawbacks is that, it has to be like proof of stake based, right? So you kind of have the drawbacks of proof of stake compared, you kind of have the disadvantages of proof of stake. And one of the disadvantages is that like some nodes can hold a lot more stake than other nodes. So you have like a degree of centralization in that case. However, you could make the same argument, say, about proof of work, right? In that, not everybody can just spin up a Bitcoin miner these days. It's quite difficult. So only like some specialist providers can actually set up large number of farms in order to confirm transactions on the Bitcoin network, because their economies of scale at play. So, you could say that, the fact that stakes can be concentrated in proof of stake is a disadvantage, but there's also, I guess, computational centralization also in like a proof of work system. But apart from that, like the real big disadvantage has to be with how do you get the final ordering of transactions across all nodes, considering your network is asynchronous. So that is the most difficult part of having an asynchronous network, because in the end, one of the key properties of all distributed ledgers is that every single ledger across every single computer is 100% in sync. That there can be no like inconsistencies, even the slightest inconsistency. Otherwise, the ledger is not accurate, right? And nobody will know actually what the true information is, or who really owns what on the network, and what transactions are legitimate as opposed to others. So what we spend majority of our time doing is figuring out how do you actually get the final ordering of transactions in the end, given that it's asynchronous. Well, there's a lot of steps in order to get that done, and we've also had to optimize it as well, because obviously you don't want these like steps to take a very long time. Otherwise, it kind of defeats the purpose of having an asynchronous network. So we've already spent a lot of time kind of optimize, choosing the best algorithms, and kind of combining the technology together to make sure that it works as best as possible. And a lot of these like algorithms are not like new algorithms that we've like invented. These are kind of like algorithms that kind of have existed, or ideas that have existed actually for decades, as is the case with like most blockchain technology. So for example, we use a concept called like Lamport timestamps to kind of get the ordering of transactions. And Lamport timestamps is this concept that was, I think, created like by somebody in Microsoft, I believe like 40 years ago or something like that. So I won't get into any more detail than that, but like we had to spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to get that ordering of transactions to kind of like minimize that disadvantage, because most synchronous blockchains, it's very easy to get the ordering of transactions, because it's just like, what comes first, right? Because a transaction comes, one at a time. Whereas when asynchronous network, transactions come like all of the time. So that's really been the disadvantage, but I think we managed to like overcome it.
Ulf, do you realize our audience has been either watching or listening to this episode for 20 minutes?
20 minutes? No, they should probably subscribe.
Yeah, they should subscribe. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you comment and turn on notifications. And if you're listening to this podcast, especially if you're on Apple Podcasts, leave us a rating and a review.
We're also on Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. So go check out the episode description. You can find all that information below. And we have an update on the NFT, don't we?
That's right. We didn't previously mention this, but this NFT for OG supporter is a one of one. There will only be one of this kind ever minted, and we have a few surprises for the person who purchases it. The link is in the episode description.
And back to the episode.
Awesome. Well, we've dug in a lot already, Michael, but before we dig in too much further into the technology, I'm wondering if we can take a step back and if you can break down at a high level, why, for those of us who maybe aren't as technically inclined, what makes Fantom different? I mean, we just talked about transaction speed and the asynchronous part of the technology. So, we get that, but is that the main difference, or is there something else in sort of the elevator pitch for Fantom?
Yeah, well, Fantom as a whole, the ecosystem is basically one of these like layer one technologies, right? So by layer one, we mean like platform that can execute smart contracts, but is like an alternative to Ethereum. So there have been a number of like different platforms that have tried to build like alternatives to Ethereum, and one of them is like Fantom as well. And so like what it consists of is its own like distributed ledger, right? Or its own like blockchain essentially. And that blockchain is based on kind of that asynchronous technology that I explained before. But Fantom is a lot more than just that like asynchronous technology. It consists of also like the middleware stack as well. So how smart contracts are executed. Right now we're fully integrated with the Ethereum virtual machine, just because the Ethereum virtual machine is like the most ubiquitous kind of smart contract execution machine that's available. Although we're doing like a lot of research and development to kind of like modify it and replace it ultimately. But on top of that is also like the application layer. So like all your usual tooling that developers use in order to run smart contracts. So I like to say that the way that you write, compile, and deploy smart contracts on Ethereum is almost exactly the same as on Fantom. So the key difference with the Fantom ecosystem is like the consensus. So it's the consensus that what makes it like faster and cheaper than Ethereum. It's a consensus that's completely different from Ethereum, but everything on top of the consensus is very similar to what we have on Ethereum, because Ethereum does like have a lot of like great tooling, and it has a Solidity programming language, and a lot of developers are familiar with the way like Solidity works and the Ethereum environment works. So we kind of like, in terms of like how we're going to execute smart contracts, we kind of made like a commercial decision quite early on that for the time being that we'll use the EVM and allow people to write smart contracts in Solidity, simply because a lot of people are familiar with Solidity. So if we wanted to get a lot of traction fast, a lot of people building on Fantom as fast as possible, we wanted to be Solidity compatible or Ethereum EVM compatible. Because if we wanted to create our own virtual machine, first of all, that would take time, and also like people would have to learn like an entirely new way of like programming smart contracts to deploy on Fantom, and that would create a lot of friction in terms of adoption. So that's the reason why we kind of took the EVM approach. And so, the Fantom ecosystem consists of, the underlying blockchain technology, the middleware, which is the EVM, and on top of that, all the applications. And it's the applications that are developed by a whole bunch of community members. So we've seen applications across like DeFi, NFTs, metaverses, etc. So it's really like the community that's been driving the adoption of the applications and, creating amazing user interfaces. And all of this like technology and development is all based upon like user experience, because users care about getting their transactions confirmed the fastest and also the cheapest. So that's what really is what is important to the Fantom Foundation, which, is tasked with assisting the growth of the Fantom ecosystem.
What's the sense you're getting there from just kind of the people who are coming into crypto and that kind of thing? Because so Ethereum had this I guess first mover advantage. The bulk of, whether it's NFTs, DeFi, that's happening on Ethereum. but it's not cheap to do transactions like DeFi, like swapping tokens, everything. Like, Ulf and I were chatting about this a few days ago, but like, could be in US dollar equivalent, like thousands of dollars to do one thing when you add in all the steps to do it. And depending how high gas fees are, do you think that that is enough of a driver that is pulling people now to other layer one solutions? Or what's your just kind of thought on the general state that we're in right now?
Yeah, I think that is the number one reason. The kind of the high gas fees on Ethereum, it's kind of like good news and bad news in a way. The good news is that it shows you like how much people want to use blockchain technologies and how much demand there is for it. But also it's a negative in that it just shows you how like not very scalable like Ethereum is at the moment. Simply because it's synchronous, so it only processes transactions like one at a time rather than like many at the same time. So with Ethereum's gas prices, it's all about supply and demand, right? So like the demand is like how many people want to submit transactions to network at a given point in time, and then the supply is that what is the network capacity to handle a number of transactions. And because Ethereum is not very scalable at the moment, but a lot of people want to use it, gas prices have to adjust a lot higher. Just like there's not much supply of something in the supermarket, but a lot of people want it, prices go higher. It's exactly the same concept with gas prices. So that's why gas prices are a lot higher than they have been in the past. So, that's been a big draw card for people wanting to develop onto Fantom and other chains as well. Because, for the equivalent transaction on Ethereum, you're probably paying like a few cents on Fantom, whereas on Ethereum, it can easily cost you like $100. So, Ethereum right now is only really being used by people who have a lot of money. You can kind of like withstand the fees, have economies of scale, and can like yield farm and DeFi and do all sorts of transactions on Ethereum. Whereas like, the average person can't really afford to pay, $50 fees, $100 fees. Sometimes they even go up to like a few $100s, even for, executing smart contracts that are, not very sophisticated. So I think that's been the biggest reason why people have been drawn to like alternative layer ones. The second reason as well is also confirmation time. So for Ethereum, transactions get confirmed on average, per block, and this is only if you include in the first block. So it can even be a lot longer than this. It usually takes around 15 seconds to generate a block, but then you've got to wait for several block confirmations afterwards to really make sure your transaction is confirmed. So you're waiting kind of like more than a minute. Well, that's not really like a great user experience. Whereas in Fantom, your transaction can get confirmed usually in around 2 seconds by the network. So you only have to wait, just a couple of seconds before your transaction is confirmed, and it's 100% confirmed with one block confirmation, and then you can go and do more stuff. So, as I said before, like users care about two things really. They care about, how much does my transaction cost and how fast can I get it confirmed? And so that's what we've really optimized for, because that's all to do with user experience. And that's why I don't really talk about, transactions per second, like TPS, which is one of these like numbers that a lot of people like to use in terms of like supposedly analyzing like the performance of blockchains. In my opinion, that's not really that important, because the users don't really care about transactions per second. The users care about time to finality, which is how fast can the transactions be confirmed, and the transaction fees, because that's what users like really will be experiencing in the end. They're not going to really be experiencing the TPS.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's being a user, I've never experienced any transaction on any blockchain that's like 1 to 2 seconds through to finality, and so that's definitely, I don't know, it's different and it's intriguing. I have a question around the ecosystem and the dApps that are being built on Fantom. And I noticed, for example, Sushiswap was on there. Now, I'm not the most technical person, so excuse me, but for like Sushiswap, as far as I know, originally it was a clone of Uniswap, and it's on the Ethereum blockchain. So how does a project like that go from Ethereum to Fantom? And then further to that, when we talk about their token, how does that bridge from Ethereum to Fantom? Or am I just like saying this all wrong and I don't really know what I'm talking about?
No, that's something like a very good question. So the way that people kind of move between chains. So like what we have right now, which in my opinion is also going to continue into the future, is that we don't just have like one chain that people use. Although the biggest chain, of course, by far is still Ethereum, but we have like multiple like layer ones, and Fantom is one of them. So being able to switch between multiple chains is pretty straightforward, because for example, like MetaMask, you just kind of like put in the chain ID and like information about the chain, and you just add it as like another chain on MetaMask. And so you can easily just like, select the drop down and switch between Fantom and Ethereum and other chains, right? So the way that people kind of like move assets between chains is via what's known as like bridges, right? And bridges are basically these like custodians, and it can be like centralized or decentralized, where these custodians kind of like hold assets on both chains. So for example, you might have like USDC on Ethereum, and say you want to bridge 1,000 USDC from Ethereum onto Fantom. You might interact with like a bridge, say like AnySwap or multi-chain, and then you basically like interact with the smart contract where you deposit 1,000 Ethereum USDC into the smart contract, and so that smart contract is like a custody, so it holds that 1,000 USDC, and then it's like custodial wallet on Fantom will issue you 1,000 USDC on Fantom and give that to your wallet, and vice versa. So people go back from like Ethereum to Fantom to Ethereum, etc., depending on like what they want to do in the end. There might be a particular application they want to use on Fantom that doesn't exist on Ethereum, or there might be like a particular application on Ethereum that doesn't exist on Fantom. And so people kind of switch between these bridges, and they use different technologies. Like AnySwap uses what's called like DCRM technologies, basically like a way of like managing keys and confirming transactions, and other bridges work in other ways. So there's there's this like bridge ecosystem where people use these custodian providers to swap assets between chains, and there's certainly a lot of advantages in doing that. There certainly are some disadvantages as well, in terms of like you have a lot of assets being concentrated in a few of these custodial providers. So there's issues of security around that. And we have seen some bridges in the past be exploited. So you really got to be careful about the bridges that you pick, and also make sure that it's like audited and it's more known in the community, and the people validating the transactions on the bridges are legitimate, and who they are, etc. You got to do your due diligence about it. But that's essentially like how it works.
You mentioned NFTs earlier, and it's been interesting. Like I keep saying, the story for me of 2021 in crypto was NFTs, just because like, I mean, they were around, but like the rise they had and the popularity and the gateway drug to so many people discovering crypto through NFTs was just, in my opinion, mind blowing. But what kind of activity are you seeing on Fantom, like in terms of numbers of like artists that are choosing to deploy there, and users and activity? Like, can you give some of those stats for the benefit of our audience?
Oh, the stats that I have right now, to be honest, kind of a bit out of date because they changed so much. But yeah, we've had like a lot of artists, launch on like Fantom. They're doing like NFT collections. Some of the art has been, a lot of the art has been like generative art, so kind of like similar art to what kind of you see on Ethereum. Just to name like one, we had like an artist deploy like BitHumans and like ancestral humans, these like kind of like drawings or generative arts of like all sorts of like different characters, and they've been like very well received by the community. And kind of what we've seen with NFTs is not just like generating NFTs and having NFT sales, right, which is like nice, but also like being able to use those NFTs across like different games. So there've been like these like, for example, like there was this collection of NFTs called like Wafus, right, that were deployed on Fantom, but now they can be used across like different games. Where if you have one of these like Wafu cards, you can deploy it as a character. You get certain attributes and certain benefits for in game. So you've seen like a lot of interoperability in NFTs because they all follow like specific token standards, right? So NFTs, are not just like JPEGs, right? And not just an image, which in itself I know a lot of people make fun of it, right? But in itself is actually valuable, right? Because the NFT like kind of proves ownership over like the original image, and it's basically a form of art at its like very base level, right? But on top of that, because it's digital and it's governed by smart contracts, you can add a lot of functionality on top of the NFT, where it's not just like a drawing or picture. It's also something that can be used across all sorts of different games and now so-called metaverses, etc. So you can add a lot of digital utility to NFTs, and we've kind of seen that growth on Fantom. For example, with this like metaverse that's growing quite a lot now on Fantom, called the 8-bit metaverse. So it's basically like an environment of like that's entirely created by 8 bits. So it's kind of like old-fashioned looking, and people buying like digital real estate there. And I'm sure they're going to integrate like other NFTs that exist on Fantom. So we've seen a lot of growth there. It's been like millions of dollars in sales, and I don't know, like hundreds of thousands of NFTs being generated. So definitely still a fraction of what like Ethereum is doing, but we're growing pretty fast in that area as well. And a lot of it is not being driven by me. It's not being driven by the foundation. It's been driven by the community. The community has just gone out there and done it themselves, which is what I find is amazing. And we talk to them and trying to figure out like what they're doing.
With that said, are NFTs in a bubble? Or do you think that they're undervalued? Like when we're really talking about this, like some of the price points that things are going for and that kind of thing. I know I'm kind of speaking more generally about including Ethereum now and that kind of thing. But where's your opinion? Like, if taking a step back, first off, did you anticipate the big year that NFTs had and like their popularity? And two, like, what are your honest thoughts? Are they all going to keep going up, or are some people going to get burned?
Well, I didn't exactly like predict or expect like how fast NFTs were going. But when NFTs did started to grow, I started thought, well, it's probably going to at least have the same level of traction that like DeFi has had in the past, right? Mm-hmm. And DeFi itself is still growing like pretty strongly, even though that's not as not as talked about now as like NFTs and like now the metaverse, right? Even just in the past few months. I don't know in a bubble or not. It's always hard to say, right? The important thing that I like to think about is not whether like something's in a bubble now or not. It's whether like something's like actually like real. Like, does it have like real utility and like real technology behind it? Because even if it's in a bubble now, over time, it will grow in size and in value, in my opinion. That's kind of like how I view crypto as a whole in general. Because crypto, obviously, you've had like in the past like big booms and big busts and then big booms again. But the kind of trend, ever since crypto was invented, is that it's kind of like a secular bull market. Like it just grows over time. And, the reason why is because fundamentally it's sound, right? And yeah, there's still a lot of technical problems that need to be solved for. But they've been working on, and there's still a lot of value there with the existing technology. So, we've seen like adoption grow over time, even during periods where the market hasn't been that great. And so that like adoption over time just leads to like a growing market in the end, even if there is a lot of volatility in between. But I think with any new technology, there's always like a lot of volatility in terms of like how people price things. I mean, we've seen that in, internet stocks. We've seen that in all sorts of different new technologies that are kind of unrelated to, cryptocurrencies or blockchains. And I think this is the same sort of thing. It's just like human psychology. So yeah, I don't know if like some are in a bubble or not. Maybe some are in a bubble, maybe some are not. But in my opinion, it's a big growth area like DeFi that's not going away. Mm-hmm. So I'm really focused in, helping, projects that want to, do NFT metaverse stuff, to launch on Fantom in particular.
On that note, in regards to the metaverse and gaming and NFTs, for a blockchain that can process transactions super fast and super cheap, like I have to imagine when it comes to blockchain gaming, and I don't know specifically, but blockchain gaming, I feel like, there's got to be lots of transactions happening. And when you're on a chain that potentially has very high fees or slow transaction speed, that must be big, those are potentially really big hurdles to have your game run efficiently. Does Fantom, is Fantom a good option when it comes to those who might be considering where to have their blockchain game hosted?
Yeah, well, obviously I'm biased, but like, my answer to that is yes, right? So the kind of the way that blockchain-based games work is that not like every single animation or gameplay is on the blockchain. What is on the blockchain is like the data that's saved there, right? So anywhere that you want, say results of something that happens in a game or an in-game item or something that has persistent data, i.e., you want it to continue existing, in the game, not just like in a single instance. That's something where you wrap that into a transaction, you submit it onto the blockchain, so the data is like saved permanently. So that's kind of like how blockchain like based games work for a lot of people who aren't really aware about it. So even though you're not saving every single animation and activity that happens in a game, if you're saving a lot of data, you're creating a lot of in-game items, for example, leveling up your character or building a kingdom or something like that, there will be a lot of transactions in the end in order to save that data. So, with Fantom, as I talked about before, the fact that we have, this asynchronous technology, it means that we can confirm, transactions faster and cheaper than say like alternatives. That being said, blockchains are not like scalable enough now to be able to hold, to be able to have like hundreds of millions of users or even billions of users. And the reason why is because of something called like the blockchain trilemma, which is basically like a trade-off between performance, availability, and security. So by performance, we mean like, how fast can you confirm a transaction? Like how much transactions can a network confirm in a particular point in time? By security, we mean, how secure or like how hard is it to kind of like manipulate data on the blockchain to do things, for example, like a double spend where you're spending your same money twice. And then there's also like availability, which is like, how likely is a blockchain gonna continue to be live and not be like shut down or have periods where it's not going to like really be used, right? And in my opinion, like the way that you ultimately kind of like solve the blockchain trilemma or deal with it as best as possible is via things like sharding, where you're able to basically do computations across like any n number of machines. And so you can basically do horizontally scaling basically to infinity. So if you have a sharding network or blockchain that kind of works in the end, you can keep scaling it up and up and up by simply just adding more computers to it. Whereas with blockchains, because you have like a lot of computers confirming the same transaction, it adds a lot of like computational cost to it. But obviously, the more computers you have confirming the transaction, the more secure it is. So that's kind of like what the trade-off is. But with sharding, you only have to confirm like part of a transaction, and then you kind of put it together onto the final chain. So I think, what we've done with Fantom is we kind of like optimize the trade-off where, yes, it is like faster, more scalable than the existing technology out there, but it doesn't make it infinitely scalable. So, Fantom right now wouldn't be able to have, be able to do like 500 million transactions like per day, right? Or 100 million transactions per day. It's simply not possible, for it to do that. It could do like a few million transactions per day, but ultimately we want to get into the hundreds of millions, if not billions of transactions per day. So we are focusing on, exploring like sharding and a few other like technologies as well on how to scale it in the end. It's a very difficult problem to solve, but one that we're definitely taking a look into.
Is that arguably the main, goal right now, is to address that challenge and work on finding a solution there?
Yes. Well, kind of the technology, there's like a few technology goals. So one is being able to minimize the size of data on chain. And that's why we've got like our own version of like SapSync coming up. That's like kind of similar to Ethereum, but quite different in many ways because of the way that our consensus works. So that kind of like minimizes how much data a validator needs to store on chain in order to process transactions. So data minimization is one of it. Part of it as well is also being able to execute smart contracts a lot faster than you currently do, because all like EVM-based chains, because of the way that data structures work, with the Ethereum virtual machine, when you write and receive data into your smart contract, it gets slower over time, and it's like a really slow process. So what we want to do is kind of find alternative data structures for that reading and writing of smart contract data on chain, because that's also another area that can be made a lot more scalable than it currently is. But then ultimately, how we get to like scaling up to a much bigger level than kind of what I explained is, you got to look into things like sharding. So that's also something that we're taking a look at as well, because that's how we make, Fantom basically, be used by like a lot more people than currently use it.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's interesting, spending some time on crypto Twitter, and, we follow people who are supporters of all blockchains and coins and that kind of thing. And one of the themes is there seems to be a lot of maximalism in the space, in whether somebody is, pro Bitcoin or Ethereum. And it's kind of like, that is the solution. There are people who are generally like, different blockchains have different purposes and that kind of thing. But I'm curious from your perspective, being the CEO of another layer one solution, what is it like dealing? Because the Ethereum crowd and supporters, like that's a strong voice on crypto Twitter. And some of them basically are saying like all other L1s, they're not decentralized. They're not the same. They're sacrificing those things. What is it like from your perspective dealing with that?
Yeah, well, kind of like my perspective is that the future we're going to have. So a lot of people ask me, are we going to have like one chain or like many chains? And in my opinion, we're going to have a few chains. It's going to be a multi-chain future, simply because that's kind of like how it's playing out right now. And also like it's very easy to switch between chains, as I kind of explained like earlier in the podcast. So, I think that's what's going to be in the future. And it's going to be a matter of like, like which chains are going to be part of that like few category in the end, right? And so it's kind of like a technology race. It's a race to get scalability. It's a race to improve performance. It's a race to improve security. So that's why, like for Fantom, we want to compete in that sort of area. And with Ethereum, like they do have some, or the Ethereum like Maxis, when they make the argument that other chains are not as like decentralized than Ethereum, I think that argument is like kind of correct, because there is like a trade-off in the blockchain trilemma, as I mentioned before. So Ethereum has like a lot more decentralization than other chains, which is one reason why the performance or scalability isn't as high as other chains. That being said, what Fantom is doing, because we don't have like that much decentralization at the moment. I think we have like 51 or 52 validators. We're starting to experiment in, okay, what does the performance look like, with like a few hundred validators, right? 100, 200, 250, 300, or 1,000. It's a bit like of a philosophical question, like what is decentralization? Because it's like, okay, well, how much decentralization is enough, right? Mm-hmm. There's no right answer in terms of like, it's when there's like, 200 nodes or 300 nodes or 400 nodes. There's no like quote unquote correct answer there. It's all like depending on your philosophical beliefs, right? And so, for myself personally, I think if we have a few hundred nodes running on Fantom, I think to me, that's quite a lot of decentralization. Other people might differ and say that still is like centralized compared to like other systems. Well, that can be their opinion. But in my opinion, if we have a few hundred validators in the end on Fantom, then that to me, I think we've achieved like quite a lot of decentralization.
Yeah, well put. Michael, this has been super interesting. We're almost at the last section of that we ask every guest. We ask every guest the same 3 questions. So we'll get to that in a sec. But one thing I want to touch on, which I think is interesting, is so in terms of advertising and crypto companies like crypto.com, take them as an example. They have been huge in advertising with UFC, the former Staples Center now being crypto.com arena. It's massive in terms of like the public awareness and that kind of thing. But Fantom as well has gotten into some sponsorship with Formula One. Do you mind just talking about that and why Formula One?
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, just quickly going back to your previous question, I forgot to also mention one thing. A lot of people don't talk about the centralization as well with proof of work, right? So because like running miners requires a lot of economies of scale, there's only like a few or like a small number of providers that are actually able to do it. So, in that sense, there is centralization there in that there's not like, many people running Bitcoin validators or Ethereum validators. There's only like a few organizations or few pools that are actually doing that. So there is like a degree of centralization there. But just like to get to your question now about like the sponsorships, yeah, I mean, we have like a really great community supporter that I think like everybody in Fantom now knows about, called Harry Ye. He is a guy that really like organized and set up the Fantom Developer Conference that we had in October that had a tremendous amount of traction and attention to it, where, I haven't been to many conferences recently because of COVID. It was the first time I went to like a big conference where I ended up meeting like a lot of developers in the Fantom ecosystem. So it was like amazing to see. And so he's been like a big Fantom supporter, and he's done a lot for the community in many ways. And one of them is, he sponsored like AlphaTauri for the final season. There's probably going to be more announcements about that later on as well. That certainly has gotten us like a lot of like mainstream attraction. But in my opinion, at like the foundation level, we are definitely like interested in like some sponsorships, but we're not really that focused, honestly, in terms of like doing like many sponsorships, simply because like, I know some of our competitors have done a lot of things like, sponsoring like stadiums and, doing all sorts of things like you kind of mentioned. To me, I think, the money is like better spent in us in terms of like the development and the marketing and the PR, because, some of these sponsorships can be like very, very expensive. And if we want to compete against our competitors, like, Fantom Foundation has like some money now, but like some of our competitors have a lot more money than us. And so, we can't play kind of like the sponsorship game where it's all like about the money in the end. So that's not really our focus, but, definitely we've seen some people in the community like Harry, kind of do his own sponsorship on behalf of Fantom. And I do like really, really like appreciate that myself personally. That level of commitment is like definitely very serious and something that I haven't really seen before. And I think like a lot of people in the Fantom community also like deeply appreciate that as well.
And just before we get to this final section, I did want to touch on it as well, because you briefly mentioned the grant program earlier, but I'm sure that's something you'd probably like to share and get out to the audience. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So a few months ago, I think it was about September, the Fantom Foundation announced like a 370 million FTM incentive program to kind of like help and grow and develop the Fantom ecosystem. So what it is about is like, being able to get like a certain level of traction for your application, whether it's like DeFi or NFT related or something else. So there's like very like well-defined specific metrics. So it's kind of like black and white. And if you, fulfilled a certain thresholds, you qualify for a certain number of like FTM that's vested monthly, and that FTM has to be used to kind of like help grow your product. So you might use it, to try and like airdrop to get users. You might use it in terms of like, like DeFi or staking. You might use it, for whatever way you see fit that helps grow your project. So for example, like with DeFi protocols, it's about your TVL. So I think the minimum requirement is like, you have at least like 5 million TVL, and then you can start qualifying for some more like Fantom incentives. And if you get your TVL higher, which to us kind of like shows like traction, then you also get like a high number of incentives. So, the incentive program isn't very like, it's not very like opaque. It's not like, it's a foundation that decides, picks winners and losers or anything like that. It's very transparent, and it's all based on like very objective data points where, it's not the foundation that's, putting their subjective opinion and picking winners and losers. It's really just like, okay, have you fulfilled the thresholds? Can we confirm it? Okay, you have, here's your incentives as per the program that we've announced. So, the whole objective of it is just to get as many people developing on Fantom as possible. And so that's the kind of program that we have right now.
Nice. Awesome. Well, Michael, it's been a super interesting conversation. As I mentioned earlier, we like to end every episode of Show Me the Crypto with the same 3-question segment we ask every guest. It's a segment we call You Had Me at Crypto. Ulf's going to ask you those questions.
All right. You ready?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay. So the first question, who is your favorite person to follow in the crypto space?
Oh, definitely Andre.
Yeah.
No doubt about that. Andre Cronje. Yeah.
Nice. All right. Second question. What will the price of Bitcoin be 10 years from now?
Oh, I don't exactly know, but in my opinion, because there's tremendous growth in crypto in general, and particularly in Bitcoin as well, is in my opinion, is going to be a lot higher.
Like you got to ballpark something.
Yeah,
like
we
we're not
gotta get
gonna.
something.
I don't know.
Obviously, nobody
it
knows
would be,
10 years from now, but
yeah, in my opinion, it would have to be at least in the six figures.
All right. We'll take
Like,
it.
like
that's a low answer, by the way.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's multiple times the current price of Bitcoin, simply because of the amount of attraction and attention and the amount of people that are going to be buying Bitcoin in the future, and other currencies as well.
Cool. All right. The third question: what is the most underrated coin or project in all of crypto? And no, we cannot say Fantom.
I don't really know the answer to that question, to be honest. I don't want to just like pick one project and then I have a lot of angry people going after me. Or I'd say
it could be a theme. It could be a theme. Like it could be like DeFi or NFT.
Okay. In terms of the theme, in my opinion, something I haven't really seen much about. I've seen talked about in the past, but I haven't really seen talked much about now, which I think makes sense. In terms of like how it works is like group-based insurance. So, with insurance companies right now, it's very much, there's a lot of moral hazard there, right? In that, you're interacting with a big insurance company. So your incentive is when you have to make an insurance claim to make it as big as possible, because you want to try and get as much money back from the insurance company as possible. But there have been some ideas in the past talking about like group-based insurance, and particularly on the blockchain, but I haven't seen any of them really take off, where instead of having like an intermediary, like a big insurance company between you claiming and the person paying the premium, you basically like have a community you put together with like your friends and your family. And that kind of like makes sense a lot, because if you're putting money together and you all know who's putting the money, if somebody makes a claim, they're going to be incentivized not to try and claim as much as possible or commit fraud, which is a lot of insurance fraud, but really claim the like minimum as possible, and then have to show proof to your friends and your family. And if people dispute your claim, you can have a system where, for example, there can be like a jury selection where people will analyze the claim and be like, oh, okay, this claim is legitimate for this amount of money. Oh no, this claim is not legitimate. We're not going to do the payout. And so you kind of solve the moral hazard in that case. So it makes insurance a lot more efficient, in my opinion, at least theoretically, because then your incentive is not to try and get as much money from the system. Your incentive is to minimize how much you're claiming, because you don't want to get a bad reputation amongst your friends and your family, particularly when it's transparent and the claims are transparent on the blockchain. That to me, has like enormous efficiencies. And in the end, that would like lower your premiums on average, right? Because people are not overclaiming. That's a big theme that I've not seen a lot of projects do.
Is that different? Is that different from? That sounds a lot like what Nexus Mutual is doing. Is that, or is this different?
Yeah. So I've seen kind of the like insurance model, to do with like DeFi or protecting against like adverse consequences in the smart contract space. But I haven't really seen it on the day-to-day basis.
Right, moving outside
people are doing
of that.
Like healthcare claims, where people are doing like car claims, that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
And I think part of it could be because of the regulations. There's a lot of regulations around insurance, particularly when it's to do with healthcare. That can, maybe would like stifle innovation. But I haven't seen it a lot of this sort of group-based insurance for like everyday claims. Yeah, and that's something that's a theme that I think is like highly underrated. Because to me, theoretically, like having explored it actually like a few years ago with a few people, it seemed to me that it makes a lot of sense how it works, that it really does solve this moral hazard of people overclaiming, because they're not like held accountable to anyone, and they don't care about the big insurance company because nobody cares about them. Like,
that's an interesting point. It was interesting. We had Hugh Karp on the show of Nexus Mutual, and the one thing that he mentioned is kind of like going into the day-to-day to some degree was things like weather or like different or like like weather insurance, different things like that, where it's like, you don't have to be verifying that a car was hit or something like that. It's like very standard. Like I can go to the weather report and see if this happened kind of thing. So, but really,
it's like, you can have like jury selection, right? So, you can have like on the smart contract, like randomly select like, I don't know, like 10 or 12 people in like a group insurance pool to analyze a claim, and they get rewarded for analyzing the claim. And analyzing the claim could be like, looking at people's receipts, looking at the damage and the photos, and discussing amongst themselves, okay, do we think the claim is reasonable? Do we think the damage is legitimate? you vote, and okay, you vote that it is, and then somebody is able to make a claim out of, some pooled funds in, a smart contract. That's something that I think is like very interesting, that I haven't seen a lot of people explore on a day-to-day basis. I mean, you are right in terms of like insurance for like smart contract events, but we haven't really seen that in like kind of real world stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I love it. Such a good point. Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining Ulf and I on this episode of Show Me the Crypto.
Thanks a lot, guys. Like, I really appreciate it. Yeah. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for listening to Show Me the Crypto. Please make sure to subscribe as well as rate and review this podcast.